We're going to start by Faika. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here with us. Very welcome. And Faika El-Nagashi, she is a political scientist and former MP with Austria's Green Party, with 30 years of experience in human rights advocacy. She has worked on women's rights, migration, and LGBT issues, and her work now centers on addressing ideological shifts that, in the name of inclusion, constrain women's rights and democratic debates across Europe. I'm very interested in what you have to tell us, Faika, because it's going to affect a lot of women, a lot of the women present here in our chat. So thank you very much for coming, and over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate being here. Maybe to say a few words about myself and how I come to be here. At one point, a few years back, starting in around 2017, I've been thinking about trans activist ideology and gender identity ideology, and I found myself very isolated in my own national context. I've been a politician by then. I had a political mandate since 2015 with the Greens. And I've been an activist my whole life. I've been very embedded in a number of activist communities. And I felt that it was impossible to address these issues critically in any of my contexts or organizations. And I've been looking to find others and connect with others wherever they were. And I've reached out to many individuals. And one of the first groups and organizations I also reached out to was WDI. And I remember sitting at my office and emailing back and forth and seeing if it was possible to have a co-op call and to talk to somebody and to just get an idea what else is out there, who else is out there. And it very much felt to me like I felt when I was around 16 or 17 and had my coming out as a lesbian. And I was just looking through the phone book, trying to find organizations anywhere that I could turn to. So it is with that in mind that I'm now here for the webinar, and I'm really appreciating everything that WDI is doing. So after I've been out of politics, which I had my mandate until the end of last year, I've been thinking about the situation in my national context from a political perspective and from what I was used to think of as a politician, policies and how they get done, and also what influence we are getting on the national level. And one of the main influences comes within the EU from the European institutions. And I've worked in that context before, because when I started my activism when I was around 19, I started it in big European organizations and networks focused on youth, on young people. So I worked with organizations such as IGLIO, which is the youth organization of one of the biggest LGBTIQ organizations, ILGA Europe. So I worked with IGLIO and with a number of other European networks. So I've been familiar with civil society organizing on that level. And I wanted to understand why, when we do national legislation, there are so many references to the EU level, whether it's EU as institution or Council of Europe, and why it is presented as if there was such a consensus about these issues. And not only consensus, but also actual facts around some positions, when in reality, this was not, these were not actually democratic debates and not decisions that had been taken. So for the past weeks, or months actually, since the beginning of this year, I, along with a few others, have been looking at this and tried to compile this into a report, and in a way that makes transparent what has been going on in the past 15 to 20 years on the European level, on the institutional level, around gender identity ideology. So the first thing that we saw was a shift in language. And the shift in language is not only something that affects language, but the concepts around it. So references that used to be around sex or the sexes, women and men, something that is very fundamental to the European Union and enshrined in the foundational treaties of the European Union, became changed to talking about gender. Now, this was a development that was also supported by many feminists that worked on the institutional level and that felt that introducing a language of gender would shift the focus to power dynamics, to social constructs, to social roles, and also to how women and men were embedded within society. So this had potential to also change the conversation in a productive way. This shift was very successful within the EU, and it brought new concepts such as gender mainstreaming or gender budgeting, to basically mainstream this into other policy fields and policy areas. But then at the same time, or quite soon after, another concept emerged, and that was that of gender identity. So when gender identity came, it was very unclear when sex was exchanged for talking about gender, and gender was used or could be used in many different ways, and it was already not very precise. And then gender identity came up as a concept. All of these things got merged and are still causing great confusion. You also have to imagine that all of these documents where they use this language are translated into European languages that do not distinguish, not all of them distinguish linguistically between sex and gender. So already in the translations, it is very much up to interpretation. But gender identity was pushed very directly by a group of activists. So at the moment now on the European level, there is what I would call a trans-activist or gender identity lobby. We have 5 big organizations that are NGOs that are very well funded, that receive millions of euros in funding from the European Commission alone. But in addition to that, also from philanthropic foundations, or used to also get money from USAID, for example. These 5 organizations are ILGA Europe, which is the biggest umbrella organization, an LGBTIQ organization that has taken on a trans activist agenda very explicitly since around 2010. Then there's TGEU, which is a trans organization. It is a trans organization set up in 2015. There is OII, which is Organization Intersex International and the European branch. So it's an intersex organization, but set up by intersex activists. So you know that they are basically also carrying a trans activist agenda. And you have IGLIO, which is the youth organization of ILGA Europe, and you have an organization called ELC, which is the Euro Central Asian Lesbian with an asterisk community. So lesbian with an asterisk means that anyone who identifies as a lesbian, including men, is welcome to the organization. So these are 5 big organizations that together have dozens of millions of euros in funding and dominate the discussion and the debate on the European level and within the institutions. They not only have a lot of funding, but they also have open doors to the institutions. They are the ones that are invited onto expert hearings, round tables, consultations, contribute to strategies and position papers. I myself have been involved with 3 of these organizations. I was active at IGLIO. I was working with ILGA Europe in Brussels, and I was a board member, the treasurer of ELC. So I know these organizations, and on the other side, you have almost nobody, not individuals and not organizations on the European level that counter these positions. So first of all, you would never get any funding from the Commission. There are no philanthropic foundations anymore. Those that used to support women's organizations or lesbians, such as Mama Cash in the Netherlands or Austria in the US, have as a condition for the funding that the organizations be trans inclusive. But on the other side, or the other challenge, aside, funding aside, is that there is a fear of being labeled as right-wing, being likened to Trump, Putin, and especially in the EU context, Orban, if you take a critical position. So you will end up with the situation that other big organizations that are active on the European level for women's rights, but also for the rights of minors, children, and young people, or in other fields, will not address these issues and will definitely not take a critical position because they will fear loss of their own funding and they will fear organizational defamation. And this has also crept into other areas of civil society, that organizations that work on issues of asylum, disability rights, anti-racism, or development cooperation. So these organizations have been pushing gender identity ideology in a very well-funded way and with great connections into the institutions. And instrumental for the success of it in the EU context were the Yogyakarta principles. So in 2006, they were put together by a group of academics. Not sure how much detail I should provide here about these principles, but they present gender identity as a core. And then later on, 10 years later, when they were amended, they added gender expression. The Yogyakarta principles are a few sheets of paper, but they have had a success story that now they are seen as an authoritative text by the EU and also by the Council of Europe. So quite early on, by around 2010, there were the first times that they got mentioned by first the Council of Europe, the Commissioner for Human Rights, who put out a statement, and in that statement referred to the Yogyakarta principles. Later on, the Fundamental Rights Agency, that is one of the agencies of the European Union, very important and impactful when it comes to a human rights position of the EU, mentioned in their research papers the Yogyakarta principles. And so some years later, European Parliament was referring to the Yogyakarta principles, and they were accepted as a human rights document and as something to implement and to aspire to. So the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe would call on member states to implement the Yogyakarta principles. So a true success story where there were also connections on an individual level. So we know that the lead rapporteur, the lead drafter of the Yogyakarta principles was Michael O'Flaherty. And Michael O'Flaherty later became director of the Fundamental Rights Agency of the EU that took up the Yogyakarta principles and continuously referred to them, and is now Human Rights Commissioner of the Council of Europe. So the Yogyakarta principles were really pushing this issue in a way that it became gender identity as a human rights idea and standard became everywhere, omnipresent in soft law throughout the European institutions, and then moved from soft law to becoming actually policy. And there was a push, a constant push by these organizations also. And of course, you have many within the institution that were supportive of these ideas, because very few only understood what this actually meant, or that there was conflict with other rights or with other groups, and there was nobody to address this. So that leads us to a situation where we have in 2020, so to look at the more recent time, we had a so-called LGBTIQ equality strategy. So this LGBTIQ equality strategy lays out, it's from the European Union, and it lays out a few things that are the main policy issues and main policy points that the EU and also the Council of Europe are pushing for now. And so one of them is self-ID. So they are looking to find a way to push for self-ID laws throughout the region, throughout Europe, throughout the European Union, but also in the Council of Europe. So one is self-ID. The other one is conversion therapy bans. So conversion therapy bans that include gender identity and gender expression. They're also looking to push for this. And it is something that is quite high in priority because the commissioner that's responsible for LGBTIQ rights is Hadja Labib. And she has been tasked recently by Commission President Ursula von der Leyen with implementing conversion therapy bans throughout the EU. So that's a second policy issue. And the third one is to expand the hate speech framework. So already in 2020, again, Ursula von der Leyen, who is a conservative, gave a presentation in the State of the Union. She spoke about making hate speech and hate crimes so-called EU crimes. So now at this moment, there are 10 EU crimes, and they include crimes such as human trafficking, cybercriminality, drug smuggling, serious transnational crimes. So there is a drive and the push to put hate speech and hate crime on that very same level. And she mentioned that, so what should be included in that part of hate, in that aspect of hate? So then there's racism, and then it would be hate on the basis of, she said, sexuality and gender. So sexuality and gender, it doesn't even make sense as a combination of words or as a concept. Anything can be interpreted into it, but we know that there is a document in the background that would fill this with content, and the document in the background is the LGBTIQ equality strategy, because that's the main document that lays this all out. And this LGBTIQ equality strategy is an activist document. So hate and hate speech, that's the third policy field. But in general, the LGBTIQ equality strategy and the whole approach looks to mainstream LGBTIQ or trans activist or queer positions and agenda throughout all policy fields. So all policy fields are affected by this. This is anti-discrimination, equality, employment. It is also health. It is data collection. It is sports. It is education, of course. So the idea is to mainstream this. It is basically copying and mirroring what the approach was in the 1990s around gender mainstreaming, understood as equality between men and women. Now we have to go 10 steps further and mainstream this aspect here. And just to mention at least this other area, the EU is not only looking at the EU or at Europe, but they're also looking at exporting this globally. So there is the area of external relations, and in this area of external relations, you can be impactful through funding, but also on the level of diplomacy. And here also it is very clear, and in the report that I've been writing along with a colleague, Anna Sobnina, we are referencing the documents where you can find all of this information, how the whole diplomatic corps is also asked to liaise with trans activist organizations, participate in events, and these positions are very clear in funding priorities. For example, the EU funded a project in India that enabled more than 100 men to self-identify as women. And they do this in a context where there is terrible violence and misogyny towards women and also homophobia. So this is the overall dimension or picture of this. And then we thought that this is something that almost nobody knows. It's very complex, very technical often. Very few only understand. It becomes very difficult to follow because there are many acronyms that are used. The meaning is often shifted. The Council of Europe, for example, has set up a unit. It's called SOGI, and that was in 2014, but now it is called SOGIESC. So SOGIESC is short for sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics. Though when they say sex characteristics, they do not mean men or women or male or female. They use it as code to refer to intersex. So this unit provides training for administrative staff all over Europe, for the judiciary all over Europe, for law enforcement, for equality bodies, and they provide training in a way that they promote gender identity and a trans activist agenda. And that is very clear when you look at it. So even while on the national levels, we may try to implement different legislation, you have all your staff and you have a lot of professionals go to these trainings and get fed an ideology that they are made to believe that it is law or it is a human rights consensus or a human rights standard. So when we looked at all of this, we thought that we should try and confront this one way or another. And that's why we decided to set up an organization that we will launch soon. We will launch in October. It's a European initiative. It is a form of think tank. It is supposed to be a strategic hub in the platform so that we can address all of this. And it is called Athena. And what we will try to do is to monitor what is going on this level and try to pass this on as information, but also translate it in a way so that it's useful for advocacy on the national level. It can be understood what's happening, what's going on, and also what's coming. We are also looking to speak publicly, I myself, but also some others who are knowledgeable about this, to break the media silence that we still have throughout Europe, not in the UK, but in most other parts of Europe, the media silence around this, and also to try and support others cross-regionally with capacity building, with information sharing, with supporting those organizations that already exist. I know that many parents have come together and set up organizations and groups. Many feminists do grassroots work and activism. So we will try to bring this together and to amplify it. And what we're trying to do is to have clarity about what is going on and to show that there is a lot of courage already going on. And we are trying to put a dent, at least, in this whole machinery and speak from our own different positions that come from a broad political spectrum. I myself have been with the Greens. I speak from a lesbian and feminist position, but there are others who bring in their own professional expertise. And I'm hoping to be able to build something that is impactful and strong and resilient in the face of all of this.
Thank you very much, Faika.